Hey everybody, Kelly here. Thank you so much for joining us again today for another Bayside Chat. We are super excited to be chatting with you guys today over a topic that I think a lot of you probably have dealt with. I for sure know that I have several friends that struggle with this issue of license portability. So what that means is if you're a military spouse and you have pursued some sort of specialized training or specialized profession, sometimes there are challenges when you move from state to state. So, I am super excited to be bringing one of the loudest and most powerful voices on the subject to you today. Her name is Libby Jamieson, and I'll bring her on in just a second. But a couple of quick notes. If you guys are watching this live, I see a couple of viewers. Hey, thanks for joining us. Be sure to chime into the conversation. We don't want this to just be a dialogue between the two of us. We want to be able to add your voice to the conversation. We want to be able to hear your experiences. We also want to answer questions. The whole reason we're doing this is to make sure that you guys have the information you need to make smart decisions and to help you navigate this crazy lifestyle of constant transition better. So, I'm your host, if I didn't mention, Kelly Artis, and we are just super excited to be joining you. So, okay, without any further ado, I'm going to bring on Libby. Hey, Libby.
Hi, how are you?
Good, good. Sorry, you guys, we were a smidge late because the Skype gods were frowning on us today. So I just want to pat both of us on the back for being able to figure that out on the fly and pull off the live stream. I gave a chat not too long ago about how Facebook Live is messy. And it's not a good day until you've messed one up. So I think we're doing really good. Yeah.
The joys of technology,
Oh,
right?
it's so great. It's live technology on top of that. Let me take a second to introduce yourself to our followers. I just want everyone to know how many awesome, great things that you're doing. And just a little background, you guys, I was able to meet Libby in person recently because we're both sitting on the MFAN board this year. So super excited to work with you there. But go ahead, take it away. Tell us all about Libby Jamieson.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I hope we can plug the MFAN survey later
Mm-hmm.
on because that's one
Absolutely.
thing I'm interested in hearing folks talk about. Hopefully, people will chime in and let us know what resources they're using. But yeah, so my name's Libby Jamieson. I am a proud Navy spouse. We just had our 16-year anniversary, which is crazy. I
Oh,
can't believe it's
yay.
been 16 years. I was trying to count moves. I think we're at 8. And if you can see behind me, the lovely decor in the background is some giant wardrobe boxes and packing materials because we're about to go through another move. This one on our own, the Navy will not be helping us out because we're going to be doing some geobatching. So we can talk about that maybe a
Mm-hmm.
little later because that's super fun doing the move without any support. But yeah, I'm also an attorney, and by day I work for the Department of Veterans Affairs. And I'll give my little disclaimer and say I'm not here in that capacity at all. I have to give my lawyerly spiel
Always.
on that. But that is a fantastic job. I love it a lot. One, because it removes a lot of the licensing barriers because it is a federal position, so I can use a bar license from any state. And again, that's something I hope we can talk about a little later is some of the perks of federal employment
Oh,
for spouses. And they also let me work remotely. So we're here in San Diego and I work 100% remotely, even though I'm headquartered in DC. So I feel like I have the unicorn job for military spouses now, but that was not always the case.
mm-hmm.
We moved 4 times within a 6-year period. And that was a super challenge on the job front. And especially because each state requires a bar exam and nobody wants to take more than one bar exam ever. And they definitely don't want to keep taking them over and over again. So because of some of those challenges I ran into, I got really involved with the Military Spouse JD Network and
Mm-hmm.
advocating to reduce licensing barriers for attorneys and then realize like how much bigger this story was, and it's not just attorneys, and it's not just military spouses. Like,
Right.
the licensing scheme in our country is jacked up for a lot of people, to put it nice. That's like the nicest way I can say it. But so became really passionate about working on these issues, kind of across the board, to reduce these barriers, just generally. And luckily, there is a lot of, bipartisan support to reform that jacked up licensing structure. It's just very slow because it's not something that can be fixed at the federal level, and it has to be done state by state and profession by profession. So I'm trying to think. No kids. We have a 4-legged kid. And I'm trying to think what else would be interesting. I'm recently on the MFAM board, which I'm really excited about, especially being with all these other powerhouse military spouse advocates. So.
Sorry, my space heater just kicked on. It was like, rise.
Oh. Don't leave me.
No, don't worry. Yeah, I'll just leave you on screen. Well, first of all, I want to ask about San Diego. So really quickly, is there anything that you wish you had known before you got to San Diego that could help someone that's headed there in the near future?
Yeah, so we were lucky. We had lived in San Diego for 9 years before. We had one like really long tour here, which was fantastic. And so I was able to go to law school here, get a job here, start my own firm, and that's what made it really tough to leave. But I think the thing to know about San Diego is, one, it's very expensive. And so that is a huge challenge. And that's why I think it's really tough for spouses who face some of these employment challenges. Is two incomes is almost a necessity in San Diego.
Oh, yeah.
And the other thing, especially house hunting wise, is it's so spread out, and there's multiple bases. But to get from Camp Pendleton to Coronado, you could be looking at an hour drive. But people just say San Diego, and you're like, San Diego is massive. So it's really important to think about, where the service member will be going every morning, where you will be going if you're commuting, schools, because traffic is also crazy, and it's just such a massive region. So I think people just say San Diego and think that's, downtown, but it is a very large area.
So we have some great resources for that, you guys. So check out the website if you're interested in just kind of orienting yourself around the mass of area that is San Diego. We have, I think, at least 7 area pages, that dedicated to each, like North County Coastal, North County Inland, right? Like kind of the way the locals kind of talk about the areas. So keep that in mind if you're headed there. Hit James or hit Libby up if you're if you have questions specifically. But okay, let's dig in. So one thing that I wanted to kind of call to people's attention, and that I'm actually starting to realize too, is you think of licensing, and I immediately think teachers, nurses, lawyers. What are some of the other professions that military spouses either gravitate to, or what you're seeing as like some of the professions that actually struggle with this also?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. Almost a third of spouses are in healthcare and education. And based on the latest numbers we have, I think it's 34% of spouses require a license to do their job, which is about 10% higher than the national average. Which is like, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot, right? Like, why are more of us seeking out positions that require a license? But I think the nursing and teaching thing is this like myth in a way. We've been told like spouses should be nurses and teachers. It's great. There's jobs everywhere. It's portable. But it's really not, right? Because of some of these licensing barriers. Nursing is getting to be better. There's some great compacts that make it easier to go back and forth. But I was really shocked when I kind of put those numbers together, and I was like, oh my gosh, why are we 10% higher than the general population? And I hope that's something that younger spouses are thinking about as they're figuring out what career path makes sense, which is like, run away if it requires a license.
Yeah, but no. So you know what I think actually, and this is just my, anecdotal experience from the people that I've talked to that have pursued careers in teaching or nursing. I think the the sort of the mindset or the thought process behind that is I'll always get a job on base. I can just work at the base hospital, or I could work at the DoD schools, which we know those are shrinking and dissolving, by the day. But I don't know. I feel like those were sort of the career paths that made the most sense, that were the most easily translatable to any community that you move to. So people were sort of gravitating to that. Yeah, that's
And
interesting.
I think we are a service-minded community, right?
True.
And so nursing and teaching, and I know there are also a lot of social workers.
Hmm.
I think we're drawn to that because we want to be able to give back to our communities, whether that is on base or outside the gates. And so I think it's interesting that a large portion of our community looks to these careers where they are still service oriented, right? Which
Hmm.
is no surprise because we're married to somebody who's serving our country and we want to do the same thing, maybe not in uniform, but in a different way. So yeah, I just, those numbers were interesting, but I think, we also see a lot of cosmetology. So either
Right.
hair, makeup, those kind of things, which are pretty heavily regulated from state to state.
Hmm.
But really, I mean, the states, that's what's so frustrating is maybe you're a nutritionist and some states license that and some states don't.
Right.
One state licenses florists. I don't know
Yeah.
why. I don't know what the danger to the public is from flowers. But it's such, yeah, right? Like,
So
what's the purpose there?
So real estate is a big one that we deal with. Real estate
Yeah.
agents having to be relicensed and stuff. So our Agent Hero network is devoted, or comprised completely of veteran agents who obviously aren't moving around as much because they're typically where they're going to be, but our military spouse agents. And it's kind of where we came up with the network in the first place, is to be able to give them business, because just because they're packing up and moving to a new state, yeah, they're having to get relicensed, they're having to learn the area, they're having to like start from basically scratch in a new brokerage or whatnot. But it doesn't mean they're a bad agent all of a sudden just because they came across state lines. So are you seeing that
Right.
in some other industries too? Like, I know I have a friend that's in nursing, and I know that she basically every time she moves, she starts at the bottom of the totem pole at every place when she gets a job. It's like, oh, not only do you have to relicense, but you also have to like reestablish your work history. It's crazy.
Yeah, and that's why I think, I mean, the licensing is a really tough challenge in and of itself. The cost, the time, especially if you have to get a background check in the new jurisdiction. I mean, you can be
Mm,
looking at months. If you have to take an exam, do a background check, you may be like literally halfway through a tour before you're up and running.
right.
And that's just to get the license, let alone a job, somebody to hire you. Or if you're trying to build your own book of business, what a challenge to get that started all over again just in time to move, right? And so I think it's really a cost benefit analysis for a lot of spouses who would love to be working, but they look at, okay, I'm going to have to shell out, sometimes several $1,000s, spend all this time doing it for a very limited window of time that they're actually going to be able to work. And
Mm,
so that's one thing that the spouse licensing accommodations are trying to address, is not just the availability. So will the state accept your license from another state, but timeline, how long does it take them to process? Are they going to process it in 30 days or 60 days?
mm,
Or is it a 6 month, time period? But yeah, I think some of the professions like real estate, attorneys, um, where it's kind of a self-regulating, at least for attorneys, it's typically attorneys regulating attorneys. There's not necessarily oversight from a civilian board or a consumer affairs board. It gets to be very protectionist. And I imagine probably real estate is similar in some ways, where it's, are we actually looking at competence of the person to do the job? Like you were saying, you don't just
right.
suddenly
Yeah.
forget how to be a real estate agent because you went from Arizona to California.
Right.
And so I feel like sometimes some of these are more, protecting that home turf. And so
Yeah.
that's a real challenge for spouses who, like I said, we want to come in and be part of that community. And sometimes that can
Yeah.
feel like it's a little tough.
So Lacey's joining us. Hey, Lacey. I see Hannah in the comments. I see Ellie too. Awesome. Hey, you guys. Thanks for tuning in. Hey, Jen. I see you also. You guys throw your questions in if you have them. You've got access to a legitimate expert here. Like, please take advantage of us having her for the time being. And Lacey says it's also a big expense for licensed professionals to keep changing when you move. Yeah, kind of covering that. To your point about the governing bodies or the boards of these industries. I have a friend who's dealing with the dietetics board in the state that she just moved to because, like you said, some states license nutritionists and nutrition speech, essentially, and some don't. So she went from a state that didn't and now is in one that does. She's an entrepreneur. Yeah. She's not even trying to, like, seek employment somewhere. She's just trying to, advise people on how to eat healthy. Like, it's nothing crazy, but
right.
She's facing some serious hurdles, just to say it softly.
Yeah.
She's fighting.
Yeah.
And by the time she is at the end of the fight, she's going to be packing up and moving away. Like, to have appeased the board once she realized there was a problem. She didn't realize at first there was a problem, right? Until she was told rather unpleasantly that she was operating outside of their rules. Then she's got to go not only get some certification, but she had to go to, like, take undergrad classes that she didn't need. She has a double master's or something. And she's like, oh, go back and take, Put money into the state school, put money into the board, put money into whatever the professional organization is that she's, and then, and only then, she's probably already left for a year and a half before it's all finished. So it's so disheartening and so discouraging.
I think, and I'm thinking of stories that we've heard. We're working with a dentist right now in South Carolina who's being told, you have to take this new test procedure, which is almost $8,000, I think. I mean, it's insane. So I think we all have these stories in our networks. I'll say the good news, because there is some.
Yeah.
So one, you mentioned cost. There is a new DOD reimbursement. So if a spouse has to become relicensed following a PCS, spouses can now get reimbursed up to $500. Actually, I say spouses. I think the reimbursement technically goes to the service member, but it's for the spouse's license. Yeah. And so there's a few kinks there to be worked out. There's some issues where if you were overseas and coming back, the way that it's drafted doesn't necessarily make sense in some situations. But I think that is a huge step forward, a huge recognition from DOD that this is a cost, that families were having to take on. And Army Emergency Relief will do so. DOD does up to $500. That's a reimbursement. And all the instructions for that are on the MySeco website. They actually have a great link there where you can pull up the step-by-step instructions. And Army Emergency Relief will do up to $2,500 as either a loan or a grant, depending on, your circumstances. So that's another fantastic resource. And then National Military Family Association, hopefully folks are familiar with their career scholarships program, which covers a whole host of, school, continuing education, which can be a big part of the licensing thing, keeping up on your continuing education credits. I know we have one MSJDN member who is admitted in 7 different jurisdictions. I think she took 5 or 6 bar exams, which is insane.
Wow.
And then was waived into the other few jurisdictions. But then it becomes an issue of each jurisdiction has their own reporting requirements. So how do you keep up with continuing education in 7 different jurisdictions? I mean, it makes my head hurt just thinking about it. So, and some of them require in-person live attendance. So if you're stationed in Germany and Nebraska is saying you need to fly here and take this class in person, that's a really heavy lift. So all of that to say, NMFA does a fantastic job with their scholarships program. So if you are looking for funds either for career development or for some of these licensing issues. That's a really great resource as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I dropped all the links in the comments. You guys check them out. Hopefully they're the right ones. If not, we'll fix it. But these are great ads. And again, just to echo your point, the more people that are tapping into these scholarships and these opportunities and the reimbursements, the more weight will be lending to the fact and to the recognition of the fact that this is a challenge and this is a problem.
Yeah,
I'm still stuck on that number. That's crazy that there's so many of us that rely on licensing and are all facing these challenges. That's huge.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to the DoD's credit, they are now recognizing, right? This is an issue, a recruiting and retention issue for them.
Yep.
Especially for, I know attorneys who can probably out earn the service member. So if it's coming down to a question of whose career is going to take priority, the military is going to be losing out on folks. And so last year, the Army, Navy, and Air Force secretaries drafted a memo and sent it to the National Governors Association. And they said there's two things we're going to start looking at when we decide, where are we going to put more money and where are we going to put more troops? And those are quality of schools around the bases. I'm sure you've probably done a whole nother chat on that because that is its own issue, right? So what is the quality of education for military kids? And then what is the availability or the portability of licensing for military spouses in that state? Yeah. And so, I know DoD has been working on this for a really long time, and their state liaisons go out and advocate for this. But I don't think I'd ever seen it in writing like that firmly worded to the governors. And I remember that memo came out, we're all taking screenshots and like texting it to each other, which just tells you how nerdy friends are. But we were like,
I want in on that chat thread though. It sounds awesome.
Yeah, it was super, super exciting. And I think they reiterated that pretty recently. Secretary Esper sent out something, I believe it was to National Governors Association again, but saying, this is important and we're going to be looking at it. Yeah. And I know the Air Force is working on this very complex matrix to decide how they will rate states on the quality of the licensing portability. Because, you can have a rule, but as we were talking about, implementation is a whole other issue. So how long does it take? Does it actually, help? So I think all of that is the good news, right? Like steps are being taken to address this issue, and hopefully future generations of spouses won't have to deal with some of the stuff we have had to go through.
We can only hope. So what about, I know, let's talk resources. I know we've given out a few of the scholarship funds. Isn't there a map that we could plug, maybe promote? Can you talk a little bit about that? I'm sure you can explain it better than I can.
Yeah. So DoD, like you said, has been doing great things. And one of those is working with the Department of Labor. So the website is veterans.gov/milspouses. And there are a ton of resources there now, including this very fancy map, which is a little overwhelming when you look at it at first, because there's like 7 different colors going on trying to describe the different status. And, some states are doing really well and some not so much. And so they tried to kind of highlight that in the map. But you can click on the map and it'll pull up the that outlines the military spouse licensing accommodation in that state. So I'll say it still can be a little confusing because it's essentially asking you to interpret this law. It's not always the most clear. And generally, it's the law that applies to like the Consumer Affairs Department, but that may exclude teachers, nurses, lawyers, realtors, some of the folks who are in these maybe self-regulating professions, or they have specific licensing bodies. So I know, it's a work in progress. They're continuing to develop it, but it is a great starting point. And they have a handout on there that kind of walks spouses through, general steps, but, here's how you start by identifying what the rule is in the state where you are headed. Here's how you can advocate for yourself. And so they're really, again, recognizing that this is an issue and trying to equip spouses with the information they need. Unfortunately, although every state now has some kind of accommodation, we're still hearing, spouses will call the licensing board and the board may not be aware of it. So as with so many things, we have to be our own advocates, and, equip ourselves with that knowledge. And that's what we try to help with through Mission License, the business that Josie Beats and I started. So Josie is my business partner and an Army spouse and a lawyer who's gone through a lot of the same challenges we've been talking about. And we realized there's nothing in place to really hold somebody's hand and walk them through this process, right? And help them tell their stories, because that's what we found is really powerful, is not waving around, here's the rule, give me my license, but telling that story of being a military spouse, wanting to work, wanting to give back to the community. And so how do you convey that to get these licensing accommodations that a lot of times are already in place, but the licensing board may not know about it. So yeah, those are a few more good resources.
So I know you guys did this really well with MSJDN, the Military Spouse, essentially Lawyers Network, to kind of coalesce and advocate for the licensing issues across each state. And I know you guys fight state to state to state. Talk to me about the importance of being able to sort of team up with others in your profession, and being able, what are some other groups out there for similar professions? Are there groups out there for teachers, nurses, social workers, etc.? And then what is some advice you would give to those organizations to be able to start pushing the needle?
Yeah, so power in numbers, right?
Yeah.
That's what it boils down to, is if you're going in and fighting this battle on your own, you may be successful, but if the board knows, hey, there are thousands more of us, they're much more likely to see this as a problem and put some systemic changes in place to make it easier. So there are a couple other groups. I know there's a Military Spouses in STEM group.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not, which they're fantastic. I'm not sure how much licensing comes into play for them. I know also there's the Military Spouse, Behavioral Health Clinicians group.
I forget all the letters, but yeah, that Ingrid.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to remember all the acronyms.
I'll go back and put all the links in later, you guys, in case you're curious. And if you know of any, if you're watching and you know of some that we're not listing, please feel free to go ahead and drop those in the comments.
Yeah, and National Military Family Association runs two really great groups, one for teachers and one for healthcare professionals.
Right.
And I see a lot of questions about licensing in those groups. And I think that's a great, the military spouse mafia, right? That's how we solve a lot of problems, is that peer-to-peer support. And, hey, have you been here? What was the process like? And I know NMFA is thinking about building those out. So there's some more structure in place to support some licensing advocacy. And I think one of the things we learned through MSJDN is we became really powerful, sounds weird, but efficient on the licensing side. And we're almost to 50. I think we're at 39 states now. So we're getting there.
You guys are killing it. Yeah.
But there's so many other benefits. You do get that peer-to-peer support, and not just on licensing, but to come in and be like, oh my gosh, I went and applied for these jobs and the people had no idea, what to do with my resume. And the jobs, we tripled the number of members who found a job through MSJDN between 2014 and 2018, just by doing some partnerships and a hiring program. So I think there are some really great benefits to building out those groups and having those kind of specialties where, I would love to see a military spouse realtor advocacy network. I don't know if your group, talks
I
much
mean, maybe we'll
advocacy, but
start
I think
one. I don't know. If there's not one out there, we'll definitely look into it. And it's just, I think a lot of times people think of some of, especially I would say even with real estate, you think of it as a business expense. I think we've just been kind of normalized to it for the most part. So that you're like, well, okay, we've got to move. So I've got to, if you own a business, there are things you have to do with your business to be able to, shutter, reopen, or file in certain states. So I think we have kind of gotten just accustomed to the hardship, as with most things in our life, and it's just overwhelming to think about fighting for reform sometimes. So, yeah, I don't know. I think there's value there, and I love the fact that when you're able to join a group and sort of have power in numbers, you're not only you not only have the camaraderie and like the strength behind all of your voices, but you're so dispersed. So when you think about
yeah,
things on a local level, like you're going to move before there's any change, more than likely. And then you're going to get to the new place and you're going to be tired, or you're not as motivated to continue fighting for it if you're going to move anyway, right? But if you're doing this on a bigger scale, if you're grouping up with folks across the country, you're doing work that someone else will pick up when they come in, and then you're going to pick up somebody else's work in the state that you're headed to. So those are really, I think, important things to think about when it comes to stuff like this. Just keep being the squeaky wheel. Keep squeaking.
Yeah. And I think people are always like, oh, of course it was the lawyers group that, got it together. And I think, sure, maybe we're a little more comfortable being that squeaky wheel.
Yeah.
But I don't think our success came because we're lawyers. I think our success came because we're military spouses.
Oh, I love that.
And because we're persistent, we wanted to make a change for the next generation. And we have really powerful stories, right? So lawyers, nobody likes lawyers. Nobody wants to go out of their way to like be nice to lawyers. They're not like, oh, we should change these rules because lawyers want us to. But I think being able to come in and tell our stories as military spouses was the really powerful piece that allowed that change to happen.
Yeah. And you guys are also laying the groundwork too, though. I will say, like, your expertise is not to be diminished because you've been able to kind of, how to navigate the state systems and the state courts. So that's something of huge value that any other profession should definitely be paying attention to. Love it. What else do we need to know? I'm not seeing any questions right now, so we'll just move on. What do we need to be asking? What are the questions that need to be asked that you can address?
Yeah, so I think implementation is really the stage we're at right now, right? So if you're going to a state, you can find the rule that offers a military spouse licensing accommodation. But the challenge is really the implementation right now. So I would love to hear if people are on, what resources are they going to, what resources are people using, and to help them navigate these issues. Are you going to DOD and MySeco and using their career counselors? Are you going into Fleet and Family locally, which can also be an option? Are you going directly to the state board or the commission for help? Are you going, into these Facebook groups and trying to get peer-to-peer support? All of the above. And I guess this is where I'll put in a plug for the MFAN survey because it does talk about this. And so I think taking that survey and sharing what resources you're using, but also what resources would you like to see, what would be helpful to navigate these issues. I think that is a really great piece of the survey and helping us figure out like what other resources need to be built. I would love to see, this is not really licensing, but I think more entrepreneurship, because I had my own firm here in San Diego before we moved the first time. And are you doing the survey?
Yeah, sorry, it's on the screen. Yeah. I was trying not to interrupt you.
I'm fun of this.
Yeah.
But I think we are, as spouses, we're up for the challenge. We can start a business, but then as you were referencing, the challenge a lot of times is transferring that business across state lines. And that's not always just the occupational license. It's do you have to re-register? I can't
Yeah.
remember what they call it, as like a foreign entity.
Yeah.
You know, how do you get the new business license? What's the sales tax issue? You know, there's like all these
It's
issues. So
crazy.
I would
Yeah.
love to see DoD set up like a entrepreneurship portability center or somewhere. And I'm sure maybe some of the SECO spouses can offer, or SECO counselors offer some of this advice. But, you know, I think that is the real, right? We can all get that initial license, set up the initial business, that the challenge is that portability piece.
Yeah.
So
I think it also, like, so there's so many, it's kind of like with everything in life in general, but specifically military spouse life. And I know the Military Family Advisory Network survey pulls a lot of these stories together, but there's so many things that lead to other things. There's so many, like, not having license portability. You guys are contemplating geo-batching, right? Which means living separately. Like, service member goes, you stay, I assume. But so because you've got employment, you have your license here, you've done the cost benefit, and you know, like, it's not really worth it for me to move. Okay, cool. So you stay. But then there are all these other issues that are going to pop up for you guys on down the road. Not necessarily non-navigable issues, but issues nonetheless that are atypical to the typical American family situation. Or let's say you pack up and move and you don't have the opportunity to work because your license didn't transport and it doesn't make financial sense to relicense or whatnot. Now you're down to one income. And what if you just moved to San Diego? Like we just talked about, maybe I have to live in an area that doesn't have the greatest schools, or there's so many factors that all kind of intertwine in this web that we're constantly figuring out. And it's not just at once. Like we have to figure this out over and over and over and over again. And just imagine how taxing that is on us mentally, and what capacity we could have to do other amazing, great things if we weren't consistently coming back and starting from square one. So that's my soapbox. You guys take the survey, fill out your stories, tell your experiences, exactly what Libby was just saying. Talk about the resources that you do go to and that you do rely on, because we can help maybe strengthen some of the awareness of those sorts of things. Talk about things you brainstorm, dream. Listen, on that survey, I put in some crazy stuff because I was like, you know what? Actually, there should be a thing where, like, you never know, like it could actually materialize at some point. So like, this is your chance to just, to tell, it will be read, it will be qualified, quantified as data that people are paying attention to.
Yeah. And one thing you said reminded me, you know, we do talk a lot about DoD and DOL starting to put resources into, especially the licensing issue, but more broadly, the employment issue, because they realize it affects recruiting and retention. One thing we don't talk a lot about is how the spouse employment plays a role in transition, right? And you reminded me of that talking about, right? Like, so what is the impact on the spouse's earning ability over time to have to start over at each new duty station? And think about, you know, we pour so many resources into transition. It's such a difficult time for the service member, but how great would it be if the spouse had not just a job, but a career and a good income, and they were that stable support. So instead of going from one income to zero, or maybe like 1.5, you know, to just the spouses, that the spouse could actually support the veteran, and the veteran didn't have to take the first job that came along, and could have, you know, the luxury of transitioning with that financial support. And we don't really, I don't hear that talked about a lot, but I think that is so important and could have such a role in these difficult transitions, right?
I could not have said it better myself. Like, this is another one of my like rants, because I would love, we're like, I don't know, 4 years out from transitioning, and I mean, I would love to be the one to like float us and support us. Like, I have I would love to be the breadwinner. Like and my husband would probably love to not be. Like, you know, and they've earned a chance to like explore. You know, they've been doing this job for probably 20, if not, you know, however many years. They've kind of, and most of them go right in out of school. Like, they haven't had the chance to explore what employment or entrepreneurship or whatever looks like for them. They need the opportunity to do that, and we can't afford them to, because they have to feed the family. So yeah, no, I know. I brought that up. I've brought that up at a few different events that I've been at and things where they're like, focus grouping military. I'm like, you guys are missing the point. Like, transition is tough, yes, but it doesn't have to be as hard as it is. And here's why. Here are all these things that we could do to help make it a softer landing for these service members. So, preach. We're having church. Anybody want to join church? Like, we're gonna just...
My kind of church.
Song request, anything, yeah. Oh man, I had a question and I think I've lost. I can't remember what I was going to ask you. What else do we need to be thinking about? So you kind of mentioned, are there any careers or professions that are easier to transfer than others? I say that loosely.
Yeah, I mean, anything without a license.
Anything without a license. So don't specialize.
Yeah. Right. Well, I mean, I think there's things like IT, right? You can get certifications, but there's not like a state-based license to work in IT. Right. And I love what Microsoft has been doing with their coding academies and really trying to get spouses into tech. One, because it's something that's not just portable, like everybody, every company needs IT and tech support. But the licensing issue isn't there, right? And it's something that can probably be done remotely in a lot of cases. So going back to that point about not just finding a job, but building a career, that's what I love about my job with VA is I'm not starting over at each duty station. I'm actually building some seniority and growing in a company. It's like, what a luxury. We don't usually have that. So something that is portable and remote and allows you to stay with the same employer and really grow and develop, I think is incredible. And so I really have been preaching, speaking of church, I've been preaching like the IT career path or tech, more broadly, because I think that is a really great option for spouses.
It seems like the trends are finally like working in our favor. So the trend towards remote working and things like that are finally like, oh, sweet. This is great. Yeah, those are great points. And I actually really love the idea of kind of flipping or inverting your job search instead of saying, I want to be a nurse, or blank profession. Starting to kind of take components of things that you enjoy, things that you're good at, things that you want to learn and become proficient in, and then figuring out how to plug that into a profession that may not have as many barriers. That's great.
Right.
So you mentioned wanting to talk about federal jobs. Let's dip our toes into that a little bit. As long as and I didn't ask your time limit before we jumped on. You tell me when your time gets tight, because I don't want to bill.
Okay. I'm glad you remembered, because I don't. I have about probably 10 more minutes.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm glad someone has a good memory, because I don't. So I think federal employment, kind of along the lines of IT, can be really fantastic because, again, those licensing barriers are removed. So nursing, like psychology, I'm trying to think of what else. But federally, usually you can work with just a state license. So if you're credentialed in a U.S. jurisdiction, then you can go work federally and you don't have to worry, anywhere in the federal system that license will be accepted. For the most part, there are some, as always, there's some caveats to that. But and then the other benefit, obviously, is, there's usually federal employment around a base. And so that's a really great match. And what MSJDN did that I loved was they went to the Army and said, we have this great pool of military spouse attorneys. They're near a base. If you need to hire a civilian attorney, why not look at this pool first? And now with the, ever growing military spouse hiring preference, more and more agencies are starting to look at military spouses. And so I have really benefited from it. I do think, my agency is run by a military spouse, which is one reason I love it so much, because she really gets it. And so maybe not every agency is going to be as generous with remote work and that kind of thing. But once you're in the system, you can generally, move around in it. So yeah, I'm a huge advocate for federal employment. I think it makes a lot of sense. It can be really tough. I think it makes me sad when I see spouses just put in resume after resume into USA Jobs, which is like a giant black hole, right? I think we've all been there.
Oh, that was going to be my follow-up, is how in the world, because most people are so intimidated and discouraged by the system in general. So
yeah. And my current job, I applied for in USA Jobs and did not get it. I didn't even get referred. But then wow. I went to a job fair in person and was able to interview and got the job. And so I think that's a really big key for federal employment is people think it's different. You still have to network. You still have to do a lot of the same stuff that you would do in the private sector. And that's a challenge. That can be a challenge, right? Like networking maybe at your next duty station while you're still, before you've moved. That's where that peer-to-peer group can come in and, hey, who knows somebody that works in X agency and help you, help connect those dots. But yeah, I would say you can't rely just on USA Jobs. You have to network, go to the job fairs, make those connections. When you do apply, a lot of times they'll still tell you need to go apply through USA Jobs, but someone it will be, watching for it on the other end.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you have to make sure your resume, federal resumes are funky. There's some really great webinars on how to do that, but you have to put in, hours worked and my typically 2-page resume is like a 12-page resume when it comes to federal employment because you have to put in so much more information. And so you need to make sure, you're doing everything to get through the USA Jobs hoops.
Yeah.
But that has to be supplemented by that like networking and hitting the ground piece. And that's where I think, it seems like with the new preference, so now you can search on USA Jobs, you can click military spouse and it'll show you jobs that are hiring with the military spouse preference. And that's fantastic. But I still think it's useful to go in for Navy. It's like Fleet and Family, talk to the folks on the ground, see what help they can give you, making those local connections. It can't just all be through the website.
Yeah. If you're there, do whatever you can. And then maybe even not, if it's a division or an office or something that you have at both the duty stations, make the warm connection at your current duty station, whether you work there or not. Ask if they'll intro you. You guys, all the old school rules still apply. Like just because it's 2019 and everything's digital and you want to work remotely doesn't mean you have to still go pound the pavement. Like you have to show your face and shake hands and make good impressions. I can't believe your resume didn't get accepted. It's crazy.
I know. Yeah.
So you guys, that is take that point home with you. It takes more than just the resume, no matter how good the resume looks, y'all. And I've seen her bio, go in and make the connections. So yeah, great advice. Okay. Is there where can people find you? I know we talked about Mission License, so I'll drop all those links. I think are in the post copy. I'll make sure everyone's connected there. But what else would you like to leave folks with, and how can they connect with you if they're interested in learning more?
Yeah. So missionlicense.com is our website, and info@missionlicense.com is the email. So feel free, reach out. We're both military spouses. We want to see other spouses overcoming these barriers. So we're here to help. And sometimes it's not actually hiring us, but we just want to point you in the right direction to the right resources. So don't be shy about reaching out. And we're on all the social media. Well, we're locked out of our Instagram right now.
I was going to say, I was looking for you on Instagram this morning. Where'd you go?
Did you break the rules? No, we're in this loop where they're reset it, and then when you go to reset it, they're that account doesn't exist, and then you enter the email, and it's we're in this black hole.
I thought y'all got in trouble. Instagram jail. Okay.
Yeah. So, but Facebook and Twitter, we're on Facebook and Twitter. So awesome. You can find us there. Yeah.
Awesome, you guys. We're gonna keep Libby tagged in this post, so she'll be able to circle back and answer questions. Just throw a tag in and ask away. We'll help try to direct you guys to certain groups if you have specific questions about a profession and something we know of. We'll try to crowdsource it. I'm sure everyone watching and following this video after the fact will jump in and help out as well, because we are all in this together. Let's move some stuff. All right, Libby, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you joining us today.
All right. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody. So thank you for watching. If you tuned in, we are just like so excited to have access to these folks that have expertise in all of the different topics and areas of your life that are challenging. So be sure to tune in each and every week. If you are catching this on the replay on YouTube, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you catch us every time we go live with a new episode. And be sure to tune back in next week. All right, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. Bye.